Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I didn't expect to be streaming today, but this is a topic I really wanted to cover. We got a new Power On newsletter by Mark Gurman from Bloomberg. Obviously, we have sites like 95Mac trying to recontextualize what he's saying or just present it in a shorter form, which is always appreciated because of the freaking inconsistent paywall on freaking Bloomberg. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing because we are coming from a week of software with WWDC. We've talked up and down about iOS 18, iPadOS 18, macOS Sequoia, watchOS 11, tvOS 18. We've talked about Apple Intelligence. We've talked about how it is all going to roll out partially in the fall. Now Mark Gurman is coming in and also telling us that some of it might only be coming in early 2025. Obviously, Apple has already said that some of it might be coming out definitely will be coming out later this year. So after the September-October release, when we usually expect like new iOS, then new macOS versions. So we've talked a lot about software, and we will keep talking a lot about software as we get new betas, as Apple Intelligence finally becomes part of those new betas. And of course, as apps gets optimized for them, with all the new customization features, with stuff even like putting their functionality directly into Control Center, which I have now started putting my shortcuts into Control Center, which is a pitch I've had for Apple since they launched shortcuts. I've been saying those things belong into... Guys, I apologize for the music. My window is actually closed. No, or give me a second. Nope, my window is closed. It's just that the music is so loud. I hope the microphone does a decent job of blending that out. But some people are celebrating something. Well, I guess it's Sunday evening, so I cannot really blame them. And also don't want to wait until like 10 p.m. for this stream. So I really wanted to do it as quickly as possible. So, guys, let us get into it. After a week of software, as I said, let's talk a little bit about hardware. Let's not talk about the iPhone 16 or 16 Pro and what the A18 processor will be. Let's not talk about Apple finally making new Ultra chips out of the M series again with the M4. No, let us talk about thinner, lighter, all the Johnny Ive things, right? And after getting a 5.1 millimeter thick iPad Pro, because apparently 6.4 was just too goddamn thick for that 13-inch model, it seems like Apple is looking at that as like a new start of their design philosophy, or basically a restart of their old design philosophy, which was very much focused on thinner, lighter. Every device has to break some kind of record in that regard. There are compromises made in terms of battery capacity, battery life, obviously, the thickness of the keyboard, the mechanics of the trackpad, all that jazz. And it seems like even with Johnny Ive being gone, with Apple having given us back like HDMI ports and SD card slots and MagSafe charging on the MacBook, it seems like Apple is still not quite satisfied with that. This is Mark Gurman regurgitating everything we've already talked on this channel about in regards to WWDC, and he also confirms that some features might be slower to roll out than others. I don't care about that much, to be honest. As much as I obviously want to inform you guys, those are like very minute details. To me, it will really depend on how good Apple Intelligence actually is, and I am willing to give them the time until like early January, February of next year to like slowly roll that out. I have explicitly said time and time again that I see the new Apple intelligence rollout as like a 2-year thing, where I believe that there will be a lot that they still introduce in like iOS 19 and the next versions of things, and I believe that they will make some features even like exclusive to the iPhone 17 Pro at some point, that will get like more RAM and even more performance. But that is neither here nor there. As I said, we've talked a lot about software. But let's talk again, as I said, about hardware. And according to Mark Gurman, the an iPad Pro, which I like, there are some funny takes now on the iPad Pro. Like I've seen like the Max Tech guys saying that Apple basically like cheated their users by saying at the iPad event that there will be like stuff at WWDC. They've never said that it would be about iPads. They just said it's like more software to come. And they said that for shareholders because of AI and whatever. But apparently some people either really took it the wrong way, or they're really, really trying to take it the wrong way so they can just complain a little more. But that's not what we are doing here. We are now talking about hardware. After a lot of teasing, let's get really into it. What is Mark Gurman saying? Over the past several years, Apple appeared to be shifting away from making devices as thin and light as possible. The MacBook Pro got thicker to accommodate bigger batteries, more powerful processors, and more ports. And basically all of that was very much appreciated by the MacBook Pro community. The Apple Watch got a heftier option as well, an Ultra model with more features and a longer battery life. And the iPhone was fattened up a bit too, making room for better cameras and more battery power. I have no idea why I'm saying battery this way. I think that's because I'm watching the dub of Food Wars right now, and they have like all very, very funny fake accents in there. When Apple unveiled the new iPad Pro in May, it marked a return to form. The company rolled out a super thin tablet with the same battery life as prior models, an impressive screen, and an M4 chip that made it as powerful as a desktop computer. We are always talking about that. How powerful a desktop computer shifts every time. So a base level M chip is not really a desktop computer outside of the base M chip Mac Mini. I always dislike that kind of stance. It's just a much more powerful iPad. Apple never focused as much on desktop computers anyway. So yeah, but I know what Mark Gurman is trying to get at. In other words, Apple has figured out how to make its devices thinner again while still adding major new features. By the way, that it was pretty much a unique thing because of how much thinner and more efficient tandem OLED was, especially versus mini LED on the 13-inch previous iPad. It's not a comprehensive design where Apple tuned everything to make it thinner. They compromised on this or that. Hell, the 11-inch iPad actually has an almost 10% larger battery, and the 13-inch iPad might have like 4% smaller battery, but the tandem OLED screen is so much more efficient than mini OLED, than mini LED, that it effectively ends up still with as long or longer battery life. Like, it's so weird when people are putting it that way. Yeah, I understand that Apple will potentially make like an M4 and M5 MacBook Pro potentially thinner, especially as we go to like M6 devices that will finally adopt tandem OLED as well on the MacBook. But that will result in a slightly thinner lid and maybe a little bit less cooling required and maybe a tiny bit smaller battery. So yeah, we could save on like 0.3, 0.4 pounds, which is great if you're like want to like still move it around a lot, but it's not going to be what we used to have, right? We won't necessarily have that, oh, Steve Jobs pulling out the MacBook Air out of the envelope moment. Those times are gone. I know that some people want to refocus a lot of that because of the iPad Pro, but fact is the iPad Pro is basically thinner because it has a much better screen. And then a device with the form factor of the iPad, where so much of it is the screen, that matters. In every device where the screen is a smaller percentage of the overall product, which even applies to the iPhone, because the iPhone also has like more cameras, thicker cameras, right? Like that matters. On the MacBook, you cannot just replicate that, because whatever else is in the rest of the device, right? Outside the screen lid, basically, that is still your processor. You still need to cool it. You still give it an adequate amount of power for a relatively long battery life and stuff like that. It's not like Apple just magically can get rid of those requirements in terms of thickness and weight. We saw that with the last MacBook Air, right? Because it wasn't wedge shaped anymore. Yes, the thickest point got thinner, but the thinnest point actually got a lot thicker. And Apple used that like better shape basically to put more stuff into the MacBook Air, and they actually like kept battery about the same size, even slightly increased it. Then they made the 15-inch model, which obviously is larger, but they kept about the same thinness profile. It's not like you can make devices magically thin just by targeting a thin form factor. Apple has always targeted a thin form factor. If it was that easy, we would have all devices be 5 millimeters thick. But yeah, so let's see what exactly we should expect, right? So Apple Watch got the Ultra, MacBooks got Pros with more ports, better cooling, larger batteries. Obviously, all of that made them thicker too. iPhones have been getting thicker with larger batteries in general, but also like the camera bump it keeps increasing, so the iPhone body just cannot fully catch up to them. Especially as the iPhone is like what 8.3, 8.4 millimeters thick, and the cameras are well beyond a full centimeter. So yeah, you don't want your iPhone to be as thick as the cameras, as much as some people try to say they want to, unless you also are willing to compromise in terms of materials being used to make it lighter, like plastic or even like a not so premium aluminum alloy versus like what was previously stainless steel and titanium. I just wouldn't bet on the iPhone getting a lot thinner, at least not without some significant compromises. When Apple unveiled the new iPad Pro in May, it marked a return to form, so M4 was powerful, which is weird that he doesn't focus as much on the screen, because the main architectural thing that allows the iPad to be that thin is that tandem OLED screen. In other words, Apple has figured out how to make its devices thinner again while still adding major new features. Oh, Jesus Christ, it does, wait, give me a second. I'll turn off the background thing because it's going haywire with like my boom arm in the foreground. I'll let my silver play button be shown again, which is so weird. Like, it seems like Apple's AI for that kind of stuff is just not very good when it comes to recognizing like basically objects that are definitely in the foreground, but they're also like obstructing the face. But so yeah, Apple doesn't know if they should remove it or not. I'll try to move my boom arm in the future to be a little bit lower, but I cannot now because it's pretty closely attached to where I sit. So yeah, lesson learned. Apple has figured out how to make its devices thinner again. Again, very little like technical insights into what makes this device actually thinner, but okay, while still adding major new features. And that's also not quite true. Like, it's improved, but like the Apple Pencil is improved, the Magic Keyboard is improved, but those are accessories that connect nicely to that iPad. It's not the iPad itself. I expect this approach to filter down to other devices over the next couple of years. This approach has like zero repercussions for like for desktop devices or anything. I could see Apple making a much smaller Mac Mini because the current Mac Mini was like built for old Intel chips that could consume a lot of power, while the base M series chips inside them definitely do not. But Apple already like used that to their advantage by also also making the Mac Mini work with M Pro chips. So take that as you will, right? And then for the Max and Ultra, you will never be able to put them into a Mac Mini form factor. I'm told that Apple is now focused on developing a significantly skinnier phone in time for the iPhone 17 line in 2025. Now, this is actually a report from the information that I believe we've already covered on this channel, and there were some weird things about it, right? Obviously, people said it would have like the A19 chip. We also said it would have a screen between 6.12 and 6.7 inch. This is like the current size, but the iPhone 16 is rumored to go up to 6.3 and 6.9 inches. And also, like, this device was like rumored to have like be built out of aluminum, so it's a lot lighter, which makes it very, very weird as like something that's supposedly more premium than the Pros. Now, don't get me wrong. MacBook Air historically has actually been like a weaker version than the MacBook Pro, but in many ways more expensive, at least when it originally launched and when it was like gaining traction in the early 2010s, right? So I fully understand that stuff like this has existed in Apple's lineup, but I have argued that this sounds very incohesive, right? This sounds very confused because you have like a device that already is lagging behind the Pro models in terms of screen size, unless it's like somehow a screen size right in the middle, like 6.4, something like that, then it would lag behind the Pros in terms of materials being used, right? The Pros are now using titanium. This would be supposedly using aluminum. And now it would get a new rear camera arrangement going from the upper left corner to the center, which I understand that could be like architecturally good, but it also would require an internal redesign and a lot of expensive new logistics for Apple. That why wouldn't you use that thing for the Pros anyway? And once you use those better technologies in the Pros, well, now a thinner device is just a worse device, right? And unless this is like a replacement, the one thing that I could see happen here is I could see a device that sits between the like basically the current iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, right? So it would be like 6.5 inches, 6.5 inches or something like that. It would obviously keep an aluminum body because that's what the non-Pro iPhones already have. It would get the new camera design, so it would do everything to miniaturize internal space. And then it would have a battery that is larger than the regular model, but then potentially smaller than the Plus model. And now it would be like... It would be basically like the unified new iPhone, right? Like your standard iPhone, your go-to choice for the vast majority of people. That would be what I could see happening. Again, that is not the rumor here. A lot of people are saying this will basically coexist in a lineup where we get a new iPhone, an iPhone Pro and an iPhone Pro Max, and then the Plus goes away because supposedly the 16 series is the last one where we get a Plus, or maybe we still get the Plus in the 17 series. It has been a mixed thing with those predictions. The thing we know for the 17 series is that like the base iPhones will get Pro Motion, so that will not be exclusive to the Pro and Pro Max. But also at that point we were supposed to get like an Ultra iPhone, but Ultra is like a weird thing. It works like for the Apple Watch because it's like an outdoorsy device. On the iPhone, really, if you make it even larger, just unify them and make the Pro Max slightly more expensive. I think that's the way most people will look at it. Yeah, I like this is basically what we got. The information is pretty reliable. They leak very, very little, but whenever they leak, it's seemingly correct. However, this could still be just a prototype that they report on. Just because it's them reporting doesn't mean that it's correct. Sorry, just checking out that okay, that my mic is working. It was just not showing up the way I like it. But yeah, so it's a very very weird thing with reports like this, because the like we have gotten a lot of stuff over the years, which is what I'm trying to say, that have been like reported on by half a dozen like supposedly reliable sources, but then those rumors were always a little bit questionable, and then people are surprised that they didn't turn out to be correct. One thing that obviously turned out that way was a portless iPhone. Mark Gurman for years was saying that Apple is targeting something like a portless iPhone, and in fact, when like all the EU legislation wasn't even official, people were saying like, oh, when the EU legislation comes out, Apple will basically turn the iPhone into like the Apple Watch, right? The Apple Watch also doesn't have a physical port or something like that. It charges only wirelessly. And if Apple made that iPhone compatible with Qi wireless charging, well, now they're already kind of compliant with EU, and they probably could have gotten away with it. But that never turned out to be true. And obviously, famously, the new 27-inch, 32-inch iMac has not yet happened, or might not happen, or has been pushed so much that at that point, whenever it comes out, it will definitely be based on completely different tech than what was originally discussed. The same thing happened with like a successor to the Pro Display XDR, which was largely rumored to be like mini LED in promotion. But with how Apple's current technology stands, I wouldn't be surprised if it was like a $10,000 tandem OLED display, and people would legit buy it because it would probably be the best screen in their freaking life. But yeah, so I'm just trying to cover it from all sides, and not like, this is not the clickbait thing where I'm saying, oh, Apple is like making everything thinner, it will all be a giant compromise, the Johnny Ive days are back. No, I'm trying to say that saying, oh, Apple managed to make the iPad thinner, so they will magically make every device thinner that already exists, even though the screen is either a smaller percentage of the actual product, which applies to the Mac, or the screen on iPhones is already OLED, so tandem OLED might make it a little more efficient and allow therefore for a slightly smaller battery, but it won't be the game-changing thickness and efficiency gain that we saw going from mini LED to tandem OLED. So yeah, just some technical differences here. And also just like the jump in terms of like processor, like the M4 is powerful and it's efficient at N3E, but on the iPad we were coming from an N5P processor in M2. The iPhone already has a 3nm chip. It might be N3B, but it definitely won't be magically changed, not by N3E and not by this first generation of 2nm from TSMC either. The gains just aren't there. Now, there are some other technologies, and I will keep mentioning them as we discuss more of this, that could result in a much thinner device, but those technologies will not magically make the device a lot lighter. So let's keep reading Mark Gurman, and then I'll give my 2 cents about this. So the iPhone 17 line in 2025, it's also working to make the MacBook Pro and Apple Watch thinner. Now, this is not surprising because we've heard about Apple making the Apple Watch thinner for quite a while. They're using like new motherboard technologies and chip packaging stuff. And as with all other technologies, Apple is working on newer battery tech, supposedly stacked batteries and some elements of solid state batteries, maybe like semi-solid state, where it's like halfway there to solid state but not fully yet, because apparently that technology is taking like several decades to come out, might never come out in my lifetime at this point. But yeah, and then the MacBook Pro, as I said, I wouldn't be surprised if Apple makes like the display lid a lot thinner once they switch to OLED, right? But beyond that, what else is there to do, right? Is there like waiting for a chip so much more efficient that Apple could like go even cheaper on cooling and like reduce battery size again, even though it's been a point of pride for them in the last couple of years that like the 16-inch MacBook Pro has like the largest battery that is allowed in terms of like taking it on a plane. Like, what would that change? Now, if Apple makes the Apple Watch Ultra thinner, right? Maybe with, especially on like, maybe they do like tandem OLED, right? So while it already has OLED, maybe tandem OLED is just so much more efficient. They can go with a slightly smaller battery, and then that battery is actually like either stacked battery tech or maybe even like a little bit solid state, right? So while it might not reduce weight a lot, which is the point, because those batteries would still hold basically the same chemistry, they just would be a lot more dense and be able to be like physically smaller. I would easily take that, but we also have a lot of the other stuff, like all your sensors and buttons, and you don't want to make it too small, like your screen is there, like, so it would basically be just thinner, which is great. Believe me, I would appreciate it. But like, you saw the excitement for the Apple Watch Ultra and its larger battery. How much do you think people would get like nutty for like a 20% thickness reduction? I don't think it would change that much, to be honest. The plan is for the latest iPad Pro to be the beginning of a new class of Apple devices that should be the thinnest and lightest products in their categories across the whole tech industry. The interesting part is that it works for the iPad, as I said, because it's like a screen-driven device. It's because it's completely like screen when you look at it almost. Even on the iPhone, that doesn't quite work that way because a big part of the iPhone is taken up by other components, like not on the front, but like on the back. You have like 3 large cameras, and each of those cameras are like rumored to get bigger sensors in the next couple of years. Like on the iPhone 16 and on the iPhone 16 Pro, we're supposedly getting a new main sensor and a new ultra wide, and then on the iPhone 17 Pro, we are rumored to be getting a 48 megapixel zoom camera, maybe even with like changed optics to allow for like dynamic zooming, and a new front-facing camera too. So on the iPhone, you cannot just make it thinner and expect it would be like an extremely unbalanced device if you now have a device that's like 6 to 7 millimeters thick, but it has a camera at 1.2, 1.3 centimeters, like literally double the thickness of the rest of the device. That wouldn't, like, it could feel comfortable if they recenter it, right? Then now you could almost rest your fingers right below the cameras, but it's still like, it's not a guarantee, right? Is what I'm trying to say. It's like, it won't like change the entire feeling of the product, but it will potentially really compromise on battery size, on cooling for the processor. And some people will like say, well, but the new iPads have not gotten like worse battery life. As I said, that's because the screens they were using before were much less efficient than the new ones. There is no such jump in technology available for iPhones right now. There is a jump like that soon available for MacBooks as they go tandem OLED, but as I said, MacBooks are like a smaller percentage of your MacBook is your screen in comparison to your iPad. So this thinking that, oh, because the iPad did it, everything else can do it too, that's not how technology works. Different form factors are impacted differently by different changes in technology. I know that's a very basic, rudimentary statement, but it's fundamentally true. You cannot just say what's good for the goose is good for the gander, or whatever it means. It just doesn't apply. The iPad, as much as some people might want it to become a MacBook, is not a MacBook, and it's not an iPhone either. But yeah, this is basically everything he said. Which to me is also like, there are already some things when, like, I know some people have taken this rumor the wrong way and they're saying, oh, the iPad is getting even thinner too. I honestly like have to say, like I'm not a huge fan of the iPad getting any thinner than it is already. I kind of would want it to be between 6 and 7 millimeters forever, just so that the Apple Pencil sits on it nicely, just so the front camera has like a little bit of thickness, so the quality can actually increase, so that the back camera can protrude a little less, so there is fewer structural integrity issues around like the USB-C port. Maybe whatever extra space we get could be like used to create an iPad Ultra with a larger battery and even better cooling and stuff like that. And also on the iPad, we have stuff like the entire aluminum chassis, right? That can like radiate the heat from the processor. On the iPhone, all heat basically has to be managed right on top of the chip, right? Because the glass is terrible at dissipating heat. The titanium body isn't really good at dissipating heat. So you have to have like as thick as possible of like a cooling system right on top of the chip, and maybe you can combine that with Apple switching to like a copper Apple logo on the iPhone the way they did on the iPad. But the reason why it also works that good well on the iPad is because, well, on the iPad now you have a copper, which is like one of the best materials to dissipate heat. I believe it's only second to silver, right? But it connects to a full-on aluminum chassis, which aluminum is also pretty good at dissipating heat. It's like the standard, cheaper, lighter alternative to copper. On the iPhone, you don't get that advantage. You will just have a copper Apple logo that still has to then dissipate the rest of the heat through like the glass and the titanium. That's just not a great recipe, and you cannot just make it thinner and expect all the things that work in favor of a thinner iPad to suddenly work in favor of a thinner iPhone. Now, I'm not actually saying that Apple is stupid and Apple is blindly making stuff thinner. I'm doing a little bit of questioning, because some people will be like saying, well, are you doubting our tech Jesus, Mark Gurman? And I'm actually saying no, because I fully believe that Apple is working on a thinner Apple Watch. I 100% believe that. For one, I actually think that the Apple Watch, like now I have the Ultra, but I think even the regular model could use a little bit of thinning to make it a little bit more comfortable. Now, I know a lot of people won't like enjoy potentially lower battery life, but as I said, it depends on the exact tech that Apple uses, right? iPhone, stacked battery. So this was a rumor from last year, where supposedly the iPhone 15 and basically the entire lineup, but definitely the Pros, were supposed to get stacked battery tech. Now, stacked battery tech basically rearranges the internal chemistry in a slightly different way. I won't go too much into details. That didn't happen on the iPhone 15. Now, the follow-up rumor to that was that the Galaxy S24 series would be getting that technology. That didn't happen either. So now the question is, will the iPhone 16 series will be the first to feature that stacked battery, which should allow for like 10-15% higher density, potentially longer battery life, because like a battery lifespan, right? Which means it can handle more charge cycles because it deals better with heat, and by dealing better with heat, it could also allow for like things like faster charging. And in fact, this does line up somewhat with a follow-up report on this, which says that Apple stacked battery tech is instead destined for the iPhone 16 lineup, which is interesting because if Apple obviously gives this technology to the iPhone 16, but then makes the iPhone 17 thinner, does that mean that Apple will make this iPhone 17 in some ways inferior to the iPhone 16? Or will they find new ways to like even further stack the battery? And basically the idea of that is that the iPhone would then go up from like 27 watts peak charging wired to 40 watts wired and 20 watts wireless via MagSafe. Now, take it with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert on this specific leaker, but yes, this could align somewhat with Apple's longer term plans. And I wouldn't be surprised if those plans involved Apple, like, or even just their prototyping stuff involves making devices that are extremely thin, kind of experimental, go outside the current lineup. But that doesn't mean that those devices will actually come out. Now, when we are going with the MacBook, this is actually where technology like stacked battery or even like uh yeah, this is this is solid state batteries, the immortal dream of battery technology that never comes true, be it for electric cars or any kind of smart appliance or smartphones or whatever. But basically, for the last 5 years, we've been getting a little bit of positive news, not necessarily for, as I said, for full on solid state batteries, but like half batteries that are halfway there. And some people have said that we already have stuff that could like potentially lift battery capacity by like 10%. Maybe as technology develops, it could be 40% or more. And if we ever go like full on like solid state battery, the way it's been long rumored, it could be like doubling capacities. We haven't had a big battery breakthrough in literally decades at this point. We have improved the densities of lithium-ion batteries. We've also experimented with new technology, with new chemistries like lithium iron, like iron phosphate batteries that make it longer lasting, and for example, for cheaper electric vehicles. But right now you really cannot say, well, by investing twice the money I can make the battery like twice the density. That technology simply does not exist, at least not in anything that is somewhat mass market, and the iPhone is like the quintessential mass market product. Of course, we also have like graphene based cells that are in the works. We have cheaper batteries in the works that are supposedly like salt based. But yeah, obviously we don't know what of those technologies Apple could go for in order to dramatically increase battery density and things like that, to improve like the thermal performance, the long lasting nature of batteries. But there seems to be like there might be new tech in general. Now, stacked batteries are more realistic because they don't change fundamentally the chemistry, they change like the way the battery is like arranged more, which, and given that the rumor kind of corrected itself and said it would be now an iPhone 16 lineup thing, I could see that going into like some kind of experimental iPhone 17 model, right? iPhone 17 no plus, right? How to change, that's iOS 17. Yeah, I think the rumor is like basically like this is correct, right? Which is the rumor that there will not be a plus model of the iPhone 17. That would of course leave us with like an open slot almost, if you believe that Apple needs to always launch 4 new iPhones. So in that regard, maybe it could sit somewhere between like the base iPhone model and the Pros, but then be similarly expensive to the Pros because it's I don't know, because it's so thin, right? The MacBook Air at some point was as expensive or even more so than the MacBook Pro because it was so thin, but also it had other arguments. It had a higher pixel density screen and it had SSD storage, which made it in many ways a lot more convenient and a lot faster than even a device with a much faster processor. Now, there's another rumor about Apple that could give them a similar jump in technology, as like tandem OLED was over mini LED, and that is micro LED. And supposedly Apple is building their own custom micro LED panels that will be like powering iPhone, Vision Pro, like an Apple Car, I guess, before that was canceled. But then we've also heard rumors that Apple is not really committing to their own custom micro LED stuff and has supposedly canceled a lot of that work. But this has been in the making for so long. Maybe Apple has just basically succeeded in like empowering LG and Samsung to a degree that they in 2, 3, 4, 5 years could start making micro LED panels, even without Apple controlling like the supply chain for the expensive hardware that is needed to create those panels. Because obviously those companies have a big incentive to invest in micro LED, even beyond Apple, as they will eye the technology for everything from other smartphones, tablets, to potentially things like huge TVs like Samsung's The Wall, right? That's like the one somewhat consumer accessible thing we have when it comes to micro LED. So yeah, so basically we have tech like stacked batteries, we have stuff like micro LED in the works. Now both of those things are like have been happening sort of for like the last decade, but never having come quite true. So I'm just trying to basically give you some technical context. This is something that I dislike about Mark Gurman, because Mark Gurman will often very much talk about like internal prototype stuff, and he will like explain why like that internal prototype can make a lot of sense. But fact is that there is a reason why most of those things don't come out. There's either no market demand for it, there's no reasonable way to mass produce it, it's just inferior to like the solutions that Apple already has. Because imagine if Apple brings like a micro LED display and like a stacked battery, or maybe some level of a solid state battery to iPhones, right? Why wouldn't you bring it to like an iPhone 17, 18 Pro, Pro Max? Use that new technology to make those Pros more expensive by like $100. And before you come at me, when you actually look at what Apple did with the iPad Pros, which are like $200 more expensive, but also have double the storage, despite tandem OLED, despite the 2-generational jump in processor tech, there is absolutely room for Apple, if they switch from OLED to micro LED, to make the iPhone $100 more expensive just from that. And if they double like base storage to 512 gigabytes, they could easily increase the base price by like $200. So yeah, never doubt Apple's ability to increase prices. I know the idea is that Apple might create like an iPhone that sits sort of even above the Pros, but the tech just isn't there. The tech that is being pitched here, when we go to like the report from the information that was summarized by 9to5 Mac, it just doesn't make sense. And that report doesn't even line up with everything we've heard about newer iPhones. Again, for one, this is not really like anything. I could have told you that, just guessing that the screen would be between 6.1 and 6.7 inches, which would make it not really a Pro at that point, because iPhone 16 Pro, larger screen, right? That this is a rumor that we've had now for 1.5 years or something like that, and it's basically confirmed by the likes of Ross Young that we would be seeing like 6.3 inches on the 16 Pro, 6.9 inches on the 16 Pro Max, that the bezel would be even thinner. How much room is there for an even more premium option beyond like the Pro Max? Right? This is also partially the point. The iPad Pro was not a new product. It was very, very much a generational upgrade that used new technologies to make it more powerful in some ways, lighter and thinner in other ways, right? And those improvements were then used to justify a price increase, right? And it worked. By all accounts, the people buying it are actually loving it, unless you listen to Max Tag. On the iPhone, where would be the incentive to potentially get a device that is thinner and potentially lighter than the Pros, but then compromises in the materials being used? compromises on display size, compromises potentially on like peak brightness and peak sustained performance because it's so thin it just doesn't have the same cooling capacity. What about battery life? One of the best advantages of like iPhone 13 series and up have been like relatively large, by Apple standards, relatively large batteries. Now going back on that without the kind of technology to mitigate that, and even if you have a technology that is much more efficient, right? Like micro LED supposedly like a solid 20% more efficient than OLED, especially at high brightness. What do you do, right? Why would I give up? Why would I take the same battery life in a thinner device with that new technology if I could pay for like the device I'm already used to, right? A Pro Max iPhone variant, and get that new display technology at around the same thickness with much better battery life. I know that Apple sometimes believes that some stuff is enough, right? For example, with Retina displays, they haven't really tried to advertise like 4K on iPhone, right? Or something like that to go beyond Retinas. In fact, iPads is sticking to like 264 to like 300 ppi because Apple believes that's good enough. Maybe Apple sees like all day battery life as kind of enough. They won't push the iPhone into 2-day battery life stuff. But at that point, why do we need the Pro and the Pro Max? At that point, just make this new iPhone kind of like the new Pro and Pro Max. We don't need it to sit outside the usual category. Just make those new devices a tiny bit thinner, tiny bit lighter. Advertise that. Don't compromise on cooling. Don't compromise on battery life. Keep us giving new technologies for like faster charging, brighter screens, even more responsive screens, and then give us that at a premium price instead of creating a more premium product but one that is in many ways more compromised. Like, this is where I really, really doubt this report. Not that Apple is trying to do something like that. I absolutely believe that Apple has prototypes in the work that are supposed to make the Apple Watch thinner. In fact, when you look at the Apple Watch, like when we go to apple.com, you will find that it's actually, oh wow, Apple Intelligence front and center after dub. Wow. And you will see the current Apple Watch models, right? You will see those are not that thin. Certainly not the Ultra, that's quite a hefty boy. The SE obviously is like an older design, but even like the standard Series 9 or whatever is not super thin. When we go into like Apple Watch Series 9, we go into tech specs, right? 45 millimeters. You see the depth is 11 millimeters. Yeah, this is easily something that Apple could advertise as like, now it's just 8 millimeters thick. It's using stacked battery, which handles like heat better and has higher battery chemistry density. So the weight is around the same, right? But it's a little bit thinner, and we maybe redesigned like the motherboard inside a little bit to be even more space sufficient. We repositioned some of the sensors in there a little bit, and maybe we just tuned the materials a little bit, especially the stainless steel, which you can see is like a lot heavier. Right, it's like 12 grams more than the aluminum version with cellular, which all stainless steel models have cellular. So yeah, and Apple could just say, well, we use like a new stainless steel alloy. It's also 5% lighter. Maybe they also give you a tiny little bit less stainless steel, and to me that makes perfect sense. On the MacBook Pro, it's also actually not that surprising. However, would it be thinner than like the pre-Apple Silicon redesigned MacBook Pro? I doubt it. But could Apple like trim that a little bit? Yeah, I don't see why not. Where's the tech specs version, right? And there are like also different MacBook Pros. Oh my God, the website. When you look at it, right, where's the memory, storage? Is there like a general size thing here? Display support. Isn't it usually? Oh, here it is. So, So this is for the 14-inch model. Yeah. So for one, you get a thickness of 1.55 centimeters, right? So already think about Apple making that lid thinner, right? Maybe by almost like half or something like that. Let's just say it's now 1.45 centimeters thick, simply because that mini LED screen is replaced by tandem OLED. Now, we have a 70 watt hour battery inside these devices. I believe it's so. Why is it so? Apple Usually Apple likes it more compact, right? So no, that's the USB adapter. Jesus Christ. Charging. What? There it is. So the base M series chip has a 70 watt hour battery. The larger models have like a 72 hour. It's basically completely the same. I wouldn't be surprised if this is like just pinned by software or whatever a little bit. But the point here is that if you assume that this is like 10%, 15% more dense now, and maybe 5% smaller battery capacity, right? Even if it's 10% smaller, especially on the base model, right? Now you can potentially have a battery that takes up like volumetrically like 20% less space. So that to me could work in maybe reducing that overall thickness from like 1.55 to like 1.45 to maybe like 1.3 or something like that. And that already would be quite a substantial change. It would allow them, I believe, for the most part, to keep the same thickness for like the keyboard thingies. I don't know why my brain cannot think of it right now. The keypads, basically, the keyboard. Why is my brain not working right now? Guys, if you're watching, please help me out. What are the things that you click on a freaking keyboard? Like the keys itself, right? Is my brain completely fried after working out for 3 hours today? Is that what happened? I need to drink more. Yeah, but Apple could make the keys even like going from 1 millimeter to like what was how thick is like how thick is like Apple's how thick are Apple's keys right now, right? Are they like? I believe they're half a centimeter, right? MacBook key travel in millimeter. 3 and 4 millimeters. Okay. I thought it was around 5, but maybe that's the overall thickness or whatever. So they could make that like 10% thinner and rearrange some other components. Maybe if the chips get like so much more efficient with 2 nanometer, they could reduce like the thickness of the cooling array by like 5% or something like that. And that all sort of just builds on top of each other, right? And with a much more efficient screen too, we wouldn't have actually lower battery life. That's kind of how I see it evolving. But I don't see that being as like a substantial game-changing thing. I see that as like an evolution that Apple very much likes. I know that many of their consumers like, and I think that the technology exists. For the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro right now are on mini LED. The technology that we know from the iPad Pro can be made a lot thinner and more efficient. Now Macs already have 3 nanometer, but they could be improved by like N3E, N3P, eventually 2 nanometer. Apple could use a brand new battery. Apple could use a brand new like cooling structure, one that might be a lot more space efficient, but maybe not actually lighter in any way, like just a more compressed version, I guess you could say. But this will not be in my opinion, an entirely new slate of devices that are basically like the MacBook Pro Slim, the iPhone Slim, the Apple Watch Slim. At least that's how I see it. And the reason why I see it that way is because that isn't what happened to the iPad. We didn't get an iPad Slim or an iPad Pro Slim. We got an iPad Pro that by itself was thinner than even the iPad Air. That's what we got, and I think some of that could be replicated on the MacBook, partially on the iPhone, very well so on the Apple Watch. But this is my take. Now, I don't want to make this video too long. I think keeping it like a little bit below an hour is best for the algorithm, and it's best for me because my brain, as you could hear in the last few minutes, is starting to fry a little. I want to thank you guys so much for watching my WWDC coverage. The channel has actually like picked up a little bit of steam over the last week, which is very, very much appreciated. I'll keep covering stuff like, as I promised already in the last video, like we are getting like Snapdragon X Elite reviews next week. I definitely want to cover that. And beyond that, as always, just let me know what else you would like to see me cover. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for everything. Please do the YouTube jazz before you tune out. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment what you thought, share the video to friends and family members who you think might enjoy it. Whenever you catch me live, please consider leaving a super chat or a super sticker. All direct support gets like reinvested into the channel and is very much appreciated. Or if you want to support this channel directly in the long term, please subscribe to my Patreon. Link is also in the description of this channel. Thank you so much. I'll catch you in the next one. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.